In our first bonus tip of the week, we learned that editing in CMYK file does not respect the all-important Edit menu color settings. We also learned that Adobe sets the default RGB space to a tiny box of crayons called sRGB. Hey, guess what? So does your camera. If you have a fancy DSLR camera and you're not shooting in RAW, it's also shooting with a much restricted box of crayons called sRGB. There's a menu item in your cameras that you have to set to Adobe RGB 1998. That's what it's called. That's the bigger box of crayons. Now, if you're shooting in RAW, it actually doesn't matter yet, but it will matter when you bring it into Photoshop. But you could fix some of that if you're just shooting in RAW. You're good if you shoot in RAW, not if you shoot in JPEG. This week's second tip, edit color settings. I just kind of gave it away, didn't I? Because you're shooting with this tiny box of crayons by default called sRGB, but in Photoshop, I need to set it to the bigger box of crayons. And when I set it to the bigger box of crayons, I'm hovering and I'm reading down below, it says Adobe RGB 1998 provides a fairly large gamut range of RGB colors. Time out. Provides a fairly large gamut. Hello, it's a big box of crayons. Even your kid knows that's better for winning the coloring contest. Your colors are automatically better. Your colors in Photoshop files are automatically improved. These colors are not destroyed by just opening an image in Photoshop if you use a bigger box of crayons. If you use the smaller box of crayons, the simple matter of opening an image in Photoshop throws away crayons, destroys your colors. I'm going to keep reading. And is well suited for documents that will be converted to CMYK. How can that be? It's an RGB. But they will be converted to CMYK one day for printing. And then Adobe says something they rarely do. They make an imperative. Hey, use this space if you need to do print production work with a broad range of colors. That sounds like everybody I've ever met who's ever printed a photograph. So that's it. Pick that. All right, now I'm going to go back to a pretty more standard, typical, more standard CMYK. This is by no means what you ought to set the CMYK to. It's dependent upon your output device and paper combination. But for now, I'm going to pick something called Grayskull. And Grayskull 2013, G-R-A, gray, it stands for grays, and C-O-L, and colors. It's an industry standard for printing. Talk to your press. Then talk to your print shop. See what they suggest you set that to. But for now, I'm just going to do that. All right, and I want you to see the second problem about editing in CMYK. I'm going to get my burn tool. I'm going to get my burn tool in Photoshop, and I'm going to burn a large area of my CMYK file. Burn, baby, burn. Burn, 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 baby, burn. Let's go do the same thing on my RGB file. Now you can see that the RGB file looks darker than the CMYK file, even though I burned them both. So the second problem with editing in CMYK, even though most of your CMYK editing friends will tell you the opposite, they're wrong. They'll tell you got to edit in CMYK because that's the truth about how it will print. They're they're uninformed. Let's put it that way. Which of these is actually darker, the RGB file or the CMYK file? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's go hover over the darkest dark in the RGB file. And when I do that, the total ink reveals that that blackest black in our RGB file is 272% in this case, 272% total ink. It looks very dark. Now, if the CMYK file is over 272, I know it's lying to me. Let's go look. The CMYK file is 315. So the next problem that editing in CMYK mode has is it lies. CMYK mode lies about the on-screen view. It lies about the truth of what you'll get when you print. That's a lie. That's a big problem. Not only that, but what is that blue hue around that circle? That's very odd. Because all I did was take a neutral gray and make it darker. Where did all that blue come from? We'll learn about that in the next